December holds more than just holiday cheer. Sometimes, it conceals nightmares waiting in the cold and dark. My true story will make you think twice about walking alone when winter nights fall early. I was 26 when it happened, living in a cramped studio apartment in Burlington, Vermont, working double shifts at a medical supply warehouse just to keep the heat running. December 2019 hit us with one of the worst cold snaps the region had seen in years, the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and your lungs burn with every breath. My shift ended at midnight most nights, and the walk from the bus stop to my apartment was only 4 blocks. But those 4 blocks felt like a journey across frozen tundra. The street where I lived was old, lined with Victorian houses that had been converted into apartments decades ago. Most of the street lights flickered or didn't work at all, leaving long stretches of darkness between pools of weak yellow light. Snow had been falling steadily for 3 days straight, piling up in drifts against parked cars and burying the sidewalks under a thick white blanket that crunched loudly with every step. I first noticed him on a Thursday night. Not him exactly, but the feeling of being watched. You know that sensation when the hair on the back of your neck stands up for no logical reason? When your body knows something your brain hasn't processed yet. That's what hit me as I stepped off the bus and started walking toward my street. The air was so cold it felt solid, and the only sounds were my boots crunching through the snow and the distant hum of a snowplow working somewhere blocks away. I glanced behind me out of habit and saw nothing but empty sidewalk and parked cars buried under snow. But the feeling didn't go away. It intensified. I walked faster, my breath coming out in rapid clouds that hung in the frozen air. When I reached the corner where my street began, I looked back again, and this time I saw him. A figure standing under a dead street light about half a block behind me, perfectly still, facing my direction. The figure was tall, wearing a dark coat and what looked like a hood pulled up over their head. They weren't moving, weren't walking, just standing there in the middle of the sidewalk while snow fell around them. I told myself it was someone waiting for a ride or maybe a neighbor stepping out for a cigarette. But something about the posture, the complete stillness, felt wrong. I turned and kept walking, moving faster now, my keys already in my hand even though I was still 3 blocks from home. The snow made it hard to move quickly without slipping, and I had to focus on each step to avoid falling. When I reached the next intersection, I couldn't help myself. I looked back again. The figure had moved closer. Not running, not even walking fast, but somehow they had covered the distance I had just walked and were now only about 30 feet behind me. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This was not normal. This was not coincidence. Someone was following me deliberately, matching my pace, closing the distance slowly like they had all the time in the world. I broke into a jog despite the slippery sidewalk, my breath coming harder now, fear flooding my system with adrenaline that made my hands shake. 2 more blocks to my apartment. 1 more block. I could see the porch light I always left on, a tiny beacon in the darkness. Behind me, I heard footsteps crunching through the snow, faster now, no longer trying to be subtle. I ran the last 50 feet, nearly fell twice on patches of ice hidden under the fresh snow, and reached my front door with my keys already out. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys once before managing to get the door unlocked. I threw myself inside, slammed the door shut, and locked the deadbolt and chain in one frantic motion. Then I pressed my eye to the peephole and looked outside. The figure was standing on the sidewalk directly in front of my building, maybe 15 feet from my door. Even through the distorted fish-eye view of the peephole, I could see they were staring directly at my apartment. They stood there for 3 full minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my microwave tick forward while my entire body stayed frozen in place. Then, slowly, deliberately, the figure raised one hand and waved at my door. Not a friendly wave, but a slow side-to-side motion that felt mocking, like they wanted me to know they knew exactly where I lived. Then they turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness between street lights. I stayed pressed against the door for another 10 minutes before I finally moved to grab my phone and call the police. The dispatcher was professional but not particularly concerned. She took down the information, said they would send an officer to patrol the area, and told me to call back if the person returned. An officer did come by about 30 minutes later, knocked on my door, and took a brief statement. He walked the perimeter of my building with his flashlight, found footprints in the snow, but said there was nothing they could do unless the person tried to break in or threaten me directly. The next night, I asked my coworker David to walk me to the bus stop after our shift. He thought I was being paranoid but agreed anyway. The walk to the stop was uneventful, and David stayed until the bus arrived. I felt safer with someone else there, and the ride home was normal. But when I stepped off the bus and started walking toward my street, the feeling came back, that cold, creeping sensation of being watched. I didn't look back this time. I just walked as fast as I could without running, my eyes locked on the porch light ahead. But when I reached my building and fumbled with my keys, I saw him in my peripheral vision. The same figure, standing in the exact same spot as the night before, under the dead street light half a block away. This time they didn't follow. They just stood there watching me unlock my door and disappear inside. This pattern continued for 6 more nights. Every night after my shift, no matter what time I got home, the figure would be there. Always in the same general area, always watching, always perfectly still until I went inside. I stopped using the bus stop closest to my apartment and started getting off 2 stops early, taking a longer route through better lit streets. But somehow they always found me. I would see them appear at intersections or standing between parked cars, always maintaining that same distance, never approaching directly but never letting me forget they were there. On the 8th night, I broke down and called my friend Marcus, who lived across town, and begged him to let me stay at his place. He heard the panic in my voice and didn't ask questions, just told me to get in a cab immediately and he would pay for it when I arrived. I threw some clothes in a bag and called a taxi, watching out my window until the headlights appeared outside. I ran to the cab so fast I nearly wiped out on the icy steps. As we pulled away from my building, I looked back through the rear window and saw the figure step out from between 2 parked cars. They stood in the middle of the street watching the taxi drive away, and just before we turned the corner, they raised their hand in that same slow, mocking wave. I stayed at Marcus's apartment for 4 nights, only going back to my place during daylight hours to grab clothes and check my mail. Marcus came with me every time, and we never saw any sign of the figure during the day. But on the 5th night, Marcus had to work a late shift and couldn't come with me. I had to go back to my apartment because I needed specific documents for a meeting the next morning. I took a different cab company, had them drop me directly in front of my building, and planned to be in and out in less than 10 minutes. The sun had set hours ago, and the street was as dark as ever, but I told myself it would be fine. Quick in and out. I unlocked the front door and ran up the stairs to my 2nd floor apartment. Everything looked normal inside, exactly as I had left it. I grabbed the folder I needed from my desk and was heading back toward the door when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped directly outside my door. I froze, my hand still holding the folder, my eyes locked on the door. The deadbolt was engaged. The chain was on, but I hadn't locked the bottom knob because I was planning to leave immediately. The doorknob began to turn slowly. I watched it rotate clockwise until it stopped, blocked by the deadbolt. There was a pause, then the door pushed inward slightly, stopped by the chain with a metallic rattle. Through the gap, I could see part of the hallway and a dark shape standing just outside. Then I heard breathing, heavy and wet, like someone who had been running or who had a chest cold. I backed away from the door, my phone already out, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher answered and I whispered my address, told her someone was trying to break into my apartment right now, that this was the same person who had been stalking me for over a week. She said officers were being dispatched and to stay on the line. The door stopped pushing against the chain. The breathing stopped. Then I heard footsteps retreating down the hallway, quick and light, followed by the sound of the exterior door at the bottom of the stairs opening and closing. The police arrived 7 minutes later. 2 officers searched the building and the surrounding area but found no one. They did find footprints in the fresh snow outside leading to and from my building, circling around to the back where there was a fire escape. The prints suggested someone had climbed up to look in windows before coming to my door. One of the officers, a woman named Reyes, told me very directly that I needed to leave this apartment and not come back alone. I called my landlord that night and broke my lease, losing my security deposit but gaining peace of mind. I moved in with Marcus temporarily and found a new place in a different neighborhood within 2 weeks. I never saw the figure again after that night, but for months afterward, I would catch myself checking over my shoulder whenever I walked alone after dark. I still do sometimes, even now, years later. The police never identified who it was. The footprints led to a parking lot where the trail went cold, and there were no security cameras in that area to capture footage. Detective Reyes told me later that there had been similar reports from other women in the area around the same time, always during winter months. Always someone being followed at night by a figure in dark clothing who never spoke or got close enough to be identified. But none of the cases were ever solved. What haunts me most is not the following itself, but the patience. The way the figure appeared night after night, always watching, never rushing, like they were waiting for something specific. Waiting for me to make a mistake, to be too tired to notice, to let my guard down for just a moment. And that final night, when they tried my door and found it unlocked except for the chain, I realized how close I had come to discovering what they wanted. Some nights I still wake up thinking about that breathing in the hallway and wondering what would have happened if I hadn't put that chain on. Story 2. The Empty Road. The road between Spokane and Coeur d'Alene gets lonely after midnight, especially in December when snow covers everything and the moon hides behind thick clouds. I was 23, driving home from my girlfriend's place after an argument that left both of us exhausted and needing space. It was 1:30 in the morning, and I just wanted to get back to my apartment and sleep. The highway was nearly empty, just me and the occasional semi-truck passing in the opposite direction. My car was a 15-year-old Honda with a heater that barely worked and a radio that cut in and out depending on the terrain. I had the heat cranked as high as it would go and was still wearing my jacket and gloves. The dashboard clock glowed a faint green, and the only other light came from my headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. I noticed the car behind me about 20 miles outside of Spokane. At first, it was just distant headlights in my rearview mirror, nothing unusual. But as the miles passed, those headlights never got closer or farther away. They maintained the exact same distance, maybe 200 feet back, matching my speed perfectly. When I slowed down for a curve, they slowed down. When I sped up on a straightaway, they sped up. I told myself it was probably someone else heading home late, someone who was tired and just following my tail lights without thinking about it. But something felt off. The road had several places where it was easy to pass, long straight sections with good visibility. Yet this car never attempted to go around me, never even moved into the passing lane to check if it was clear. After about 10 miles of this, I started to feel uneasy. I tapped my brakes lightly, just enough to flash my brake lights, hoping the car behind me would get the message and either pass or back off. Nothing changed. Same distance, same speed, like they were locked onto me. I slowed down more deliberately this time, dropping from 65 to 55, then to 45. The headlights behind me slowed accordingly, maintaining that exact distance. My heart started beating faster, I sped back up to 70, watching the speedometer climb, and the headlights matched my pace instantly. This was not normal driving behavior. This was deliberate. Someone was following me, and they wanted me to know it. I reached for my phone to call someone, anyone, but I was in one of those dead zones where there was no signal. The screen showed no bars and the words "no service" in the corner. The road ahead was dark and empty. No other cars, no houses with lights on, no gas stations or rest stops. Just endless pavement cutting through dense forest on both sides. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, trying to make out details about the car behind me, but their headlights were too bright and I couldn't see anything except the glare. Then they turned their high beams on. The interior of my car flooded with blinding white light, and I had to adjust my rearview mirror to deflect the glare. My hands were sweating inside my gloves now, and my mouth had gone completely dry. I was still 15 miles from the next town, and the isolation of this highway had never felt more threatening. I decided to test something. There was a scenic pullout coming up in about a mile, one of those small parking areas where tourists stop during the day to take photos of the mountains. I put on my turn signal well in advance and slowed down, pulling into the lot. If this was just a tired driver following my lights, they would continue on. If they were actually following me, they would pull in too. The car behind me slowed down and pulled into the scenic pullout, parking about 50 feet behind me with their engine running and their high beams still on. My stomach dropped. This was real. This was happening. I was alone on a dark highway in the middle of the night with someone who was deliberately following me, and I had no cell service and no weapon and no plan. I sat there with my engine running, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers hurt, trying to decide what to do. Going back onto the highway meant leading them toward my home, telling them exactly where I lived. But staying here meant confronting whatever this was, and I had no idea who was in that car or what they wanted. After about 30 seconds, the car behind me flashed their high beams 3 times. It was so sudden and aggressive that I flinched. Then they did it again. 3 quick flashes of blinding light that felt like a warning or a threat or some kind of signal I didn't understand. I made a decision. I threw my car into reverse and backed up quickly, hoping to surprise them, maybe get a look at their license plate or see who was driving. But the moment I started backing up, they threw their car into reverse too and backed away, maintaining that same distance. I stopped. They stopped. I could feel my pulse in my throat now, panic rising like a tide. Then their driver's side door opened. I saw the interior light come on briefly, and a figure stepped out. It was too dark and too far away to make out details, but I could see the silhouette of someone tall and broad-shouldered walking toward my car with slow, deliberate steps. I didn't wait to see more. I slammed my car into drive and punched the gas, my tires spinning on the icy pavement before catching traction. I shot back onto the highway doing 80, watching my rearview mirror as the figure stopped walking and just stood there in the middle of the parking lot. Then they turned and walked back to their car, and within seconds their headlights were behind me again. The chase was on. I pushed my Honda as fast as it would go, the engine whining and the whole car shaking as the speedometer crept past 85. The car behind me had no trouble keeping up. In fact, they were gaining, closing the distance between us for the first time. I took a curve too fast and felt my rear tires slide, and for a horrible moment I thought I was going to spin out and crash into the trees. But I managed to straighten out and kept going, my breath coming in short gasps. A semi-truck appeared ahead, its tail lights glowing red in the darkness. I had never been so happy to see another vehicle. I flew past it doing 90, and I saw the driver's startled face in his mirror as I blasted by. The car behind me passed him too, and now we were both speeding down this dark highway like something out of a nightmare. Then I saw lights up ahead. The glow of a town, small but real. Buildings, street lights, civilization. I pushed harder, my car giving everything it had, and as I got closer I could see it was Rathdrum, a tiny town but big enough to have a gas station and hopefully some people. The gas station was lit up like a beacon, and I pulled into the parking lot so fast I nearly hit a trash can. I parked directly under the brightest lights, right next to the entrance where anyone inside could see me, and I left my engine running. The car that had been following me drove slowly past the gas station, and for the first time I got a clear look at it. It was a dark blue pickup truck, newer model, with tinted windows. As it passed under the street light, I tried to see the license plate, but it was covered in mud or something dark that made it unreadable. The truck continued down the main street and disappeared around a corner. I sat there shaking, my hands still locked on the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. After about 5 minutes, when I was sure the truck was gone, I went inside the gas station. The clerk, a middle-aged man with a long beard, looked up from his magazine and asked if I was okay. I must have looked terrified because his expression changed immediately to concern. I told him what happened, and he let me use the store phone to call the police since my cell still had no signal. A county sheriff deputy arrived about 15 minutes later, and I gave him the description of the truck and told him everything. He radioed it in and said they would keep an eye out, but without a license plate number or a clear description of the driver, there wasn't much they could do immediately. He offered to follow me the rest of the way home, and I accepted gratefully. The remaining drive was uneventful, and the deputy made sure I got inside my apartment building safely before he left. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my couch with all the lights on, jumping at every sound, replaying those terrifying moments on the highway. The next day, I called the sheriff's office to see if they had found anything. The deputy I spoke to said there had been 2 other reports in the past month of drivers being followed on that same stretch of highway late at night, always by a dark pickup truck with obscured plates. But they had never caught the vehicle, and the driver had never attempted anything beyond following. He called it aggressive stalking behavior and said I was smart to head for a public place. I never drove that road alone at night again. I found alternate routes that took longer but had more traffic. And I never found out who was driving that truck or what they wanted. But I know this: the way they matched my every move, the way they got out of the car and walked toward me in that dark parking lot, the way they chased me at 90 miles per hour through the mountains, none of that was random. Someone made a choice to terrify me that night, and I was lucky enough to make it to safety before they made another choice. One that might have ended very differently. Story 3: The House Sitter. My cousin Rachel needed someone to watch her house for 2 weeks in December while she took her family to visit her in-laws in Florida. She lived in a big old farmhouse outside of Asheville, North Carolina, the kind of place with creaky floors and drafty windows and rooms that you forgot existed until you opened the wrong door. I was between jobs and needed a place to stay, so it seemed like a perfect arrangement. She would get a house sitter, and I would get free rent and peace and quiet to work on my writing. Rachel gave me a full tour when I arrived, showing me where everything was, how to work the temperamental heating system, which doors stuck and needed extra force to close. The house sat on about 5 acres of wooded property at the end of a long gravel driveway. The nearest neighbor was a 1/4 mile away through the trees, and the only sounds at night were wind and the occasional animal moving through the brush. She told me the house was old, built in 1924, and that it made all the usual old house noises. Settling, pipes clanging, branches scraping against the siding. She said all of this with a smile, like it was charming, and I believed her. I grew up in an old house too. I knew what she meant. She handed me the keys, hugged me goodbye, and drove off with her husband and 2 kids, leaving me alone in the big empty farmhouse. The first 2 nights were fine. I made myself comfortable in the guest room on the 2nd floor, explored the property during the day, and spent my evenings writing in the cozy living room with a fire going in the stone fireplace. The house did make noises, exactly as Rachel had warned, but nothing that bothered me. It was actually kind of nice being so isolated, so disconnected from everything. The third night, things changed. I was in bed reading when I heard footsteps downstairs. Not creaking floorboards or settling noises, but distinct footsteps. Someone walking across the hardwood floor in the living room, slow and deliberate. I froze, my book forgotten, listening intently. The footsteps moved from the living room toward the kitchen, then stopped. I told myself it was the house settling, or maybe a branch had fallen on the roof and I was misinterpreting the sound. But every instinct in my body was screaming that those were footsteps. Human footsteps. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, then crept to the bedroom door and opened it slowly. The hallway was dark and empty. I could see the stairs leading down to the first floor, and the faint glow of moonlight coming through the windows below. I stood at the top of the stairs for a full minute, listening. Nothing. Complete silence except for my own breathing and the pounding of my heart. I went back to bed but didn't sleep well, waking up several times convinced I had heard something. The next morning I checked the entire house. All the doors and windows were locked. There was no sign that anyone had been inside. I felt foolish and paranoid. But that night, it happened again. This time I was downstairs watching TV when I heard footsteps above me, in the guest room where I slept. The same slow, deliberate walking pattern, moving from one side of the room to the other. I grabbed the remote and muted the TV, listening. The footsteps continued for about 10 seconds, then stopped. My mouth had gone completely dry. I was sitting directly below that room, and I could hear someone or something walking across the floor above my head. I considered calling Rachel, but what would I say? That her house was making noises? She already told me it would. I decided to go upstairs and check. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen, the kind you could use as a weapon if needed, and climbed the stairs slowly. Every step creaked under my weight, announcing my approach. When I reached the guest room and pushed the door open, the room was exactly as I had left it. The bed was made, my suitcase sat in the corner, nothing was disturbed. I searched the entire second floor, checking the other bedrooms, the bathroom, even the small attic access door in the hallway. Everything was locked and undisturbed, but I couldn't shake the certainty that I had heard someone walking up here just minutes ago. That night, I barely slept. I left all the lights on in the hallway and kept my door cracked open so I could hear if anything happened. The fourth night, I heard the front door open. Not creak open like it had swung open in the wind, but the distinct sound of the latch clicking and the hinges squeaking as the door opened fully. I was in the kitchen making tea when it happened, and I heard it clear as anything. I ran to the living room and saw the front door standing wide open, cold December air pouring into the house. I know I had locked that door. I checked it twice before making my tea because I was already on edge from the previous nights. I rushed to the door and looked outside. The porch was empty. The driveway was empty. The woods beyond were dark and still. There were no footprints in the dusting of snow that had fallen earlier. No sign that anyone had approached the house. But the door was open, and I know I had locked it. I closed the door, locked it again, and this time I pushed a heavy chair against it for extra security. I called Rachel. It was late, but I didn't care. I needed to talk to someone who knew this house and could tell me I wasn't losing my mind. She answered after several rings, her voice groggy with sleep. I told her everything that had been happening, the footsteps, the open door, the feeling that something was wrong with this place. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She asked me if I had gone into the basement. I said no. She had never shown me the basement during the tour. She had pointed out the basement door in the kitchen but said there was nothing down there but storage and old furniture. Not worth seeing. She paused again, and I could hear her husband saying something in the background. Then she told me that the basement door needed to stay locked, that there was a key in the kitchen drawer specifically for that door, and that I should check right now to make sure it was still locked. My hands were shaking as I opened the drawer and found the old brass key. I walked to the basement door, a heavy wooden door with a deadbolt installed on the outside, the kind of lock meant to keep something in, not out. The door was unlocked. The deadbolt was turned to the open position. I could see a sliver of darkness beyond the door where it stood slightly ajar. Rachel heard my sharp intake of breath through the phone and asked what was wrong. I told her the door was unlocked and open. She told me very clearly and very seriously to lock it immediately, not to go down there, and that she was going to make some calls. I locked the door with trembling hands and backed away from it like it might burst open at any moment. I asked her what was down there, why she sounded so frightened, but she wouldn't tell me over the phone. She just kept saying she would handle it and that I should pack my things and leave the house right now. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran upstairs, threw my belongings into my suitcase in a chaotic mess, and was heading for the front door when I heard it. A sound from behind the basement door. A low creaking, like weight settling on old wooden stairs. Someone or something was coming up from the basement. I could hear each step, slow and patient, climbing toward the door that I had just locked. I ran out of that house so fast I left the front door wide open. I threw my suitcase in my car and drove down that gravel driveway doing 50, rocks pinging against the underside of my car. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway, and even then I kept checking my rearview mirror expecting to see something following me. I stayed in a motel that night, and Rachel called me the next morning. She apologized profusely and explained that she should have told me the truth from the beginning. The house had a history. The previous owner had lived alone and had been found dead in the basement 3 years ago. Apparent suicide, but there were aspects of the case that didn't quite add up. Since then, every house sitter or tenant who stayed there alone reported the same things I did. Footsteps, doors opening, sounds from the basement. Rachel and her family had never experienced anything because they were never alone. There were always at least 2 people in the house, but anyone who stayed there by themselves reported activity within the first few days. She thought maybe I would be different or maybe the activity had stopped. She was wrong. I never went back to that house. Rachel arranged for someone else to pick up my things. She sold the property 6 months later, and she told me the new owners hired someone to cleanse the house. I don't know if it worked, and I don't want to know. What I do know is that something was in that basement, and it was aware of me. It knew I was alone, and it tested me night after night, growing bolder, until it finally came up those stairs. I still hear those footsteps sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep, that slow, deliberate walking that doesn't sound quite human. And I wonder what would have happened if I had been just a little bit slower, if I had hesitated at all before running out into the December night. Story 4. The Parking Garage. Working late during the holidays meant the downtown parking garage was always half empty by the time I left my office. I was a paralegal at a law firm on the 12th floor, and December was our busiest month because everyone wanted their legal matters settled before the new year. That meant I was regularly leaving the office around 9 or 10 at night, sometimes even later. The building had a connected parking garage with 6 levels, and I always parked on level 4 because it was closest to the elevator that went directly to my office. The garage had this oppressive feeling after dark. Fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed, creating patches of shadow between parked cars. The concrete walls amplified every sound, making footsteps and engine noises echo in unsettling ways. I had worked there for almost 2 years and had never felt unsafe, but I also never lingered. I walked quickly from the elevator to my car, unlocked the doors while I was still several feet away, and drove out without stopping. December 16th was a Wednesday, and I had stayed even later than usual working on depositions that were due the next morning. It was past 11 when I finally shut down my computer and headed for the elevator. The office was empty except for one senior partner who was also burning the midnight oil, and we rode the elevator down together, making small talk about the upcoming holiday break. He got off on level 2 where his BMW was parked, and I continued down to level 4 alone. The elevator doors opened with a ding that echoed through the empty garage. I stepped out and immediately noticed how much colder it was than usual. Our building was old, and the garage had poor ventilation and worse heating, but this felt different. Like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees since I arrived that morning. My breath came out in little clouds as I started walking toward my car, which was parked in the corner spot I always used, about 30 yards from the elevator. I was halfway to my car when I heard the footsteps. Not behind me, but running parallel to me, one row of cars over. Someone was moving at the same pace I was, keeping level with me but staying hidden behind the parked vehicles. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped. My heart started beating faster, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Probably just someone walking to their car who happened to be in the same section. I started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps resumed, still keeping pace, still one row over. I could hear the distinct sound of shoes on concrete, the slight squeak of rubber soles. I stopped again. They stopped again. This was not coincidence. Someone was matching my movements deliberately, and they were staying out of sight. I reached for my phone to call security, and that's when I heard the footsteps change direction. They were no longer parallel. They were cutting across, moving between two cars, heading directly toward me. I didn't wait to see who it was. I ran the last 15 feet to my car, fumbling with my keys, and managed to unlock the door and jump inside in one frantic motion. I locked the doors immediately and started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I threw the car into reverse, I saw him in my rearview mirror. A man stepping out from between the cars where the footsteps had come from. He was wearing dark clothes and a ski mask, and he was carrying something in his right hand. Something metal that caught the fluorescent light. He stood there watching me for a moment, and then he started walking toward my car. Not running, just walking with this casual confidence that was somehow more terrifying than if he had charged at me. I backed out so fast I nearly hit the concrete pillar behind me, then shifted into drive and sped toward the exit ramp. As I passed him, he didn't move, didn't try to chase me, just turned his head to watch me go. The image of that masked face tracking my movement is burned into my brain. I took the curves of the exit ramp too fast, my tires squealing, and burst out onto the street like I was being pursued by something from hell itself. I drove straight to the police station 6 blocks away and reported what happened. 2 officers went back to the garage with me and searched level 4. They found my parking spot empty, and the area where the man had been standing showed nothing unusual. No footprints, no dropped items, no evidence anyone had been there. But one of the officers noticed something I had missed in my panic. The security camera that covered my section of level 4 had been spray painted over. Someone had deliberately blinded that camera, and it must have happened recently because the facility's report from earlier that day showed all cameras functioning normally. The other cameras on level 4 captured footage of me arriving that morning and leaving that night, but they didn't cover the corner where I parked or the area where the man had been hiding. The police said it was likely someone had been staking out that spot, waiting for an opportunity. They asked if anyone had been following me or if I had noticed anything suspicious in previous days. I hadn't, but the question made me realize this might not have been random. Someone might have been watching me, learning my patterns, waiting for the right moment. The law firm moved my parking spot to level 2 the next day, right next to the elevator and directly under a camera. They also increased security patrols in the garage and fixed all the cameras that had been vandalized. Because mine wasn't the only one. They found 3 other cameras on different levels that had been spray painted over in the past week. Someone had been systematically creating blind spots throughout the garage. I started carrying pepper spray and a personal alarm after that. And I never stayed late alone again. If I had to work past 8, I made sure someone else was still in the office and we left together. The police never caught whoever was in the garage that night. The investigation went cold after a few weeks because there just wasn't enough evidence. No other attacks were reported in that garage, and the vandalized cameras suggested the person moved on to a different location. But I think about that night constantly, about how he was waiting in that exact spot, how he moved when I moved, stopped when I stopped, how he had blinded the camera above my parking space, creating a perfect trap. And I think about the metal object in his hand, the one that caught the light. I never saw it clearly enough to know what it was, but I don't need to. The way he carried it, the way he walked toward my car without hesitation, I know it wasn't anything good. I was supposed to be his victim that night. The only reason I'm not is because some instinct made me run instead of freezing, made me listen to the warning my body was giving me before my brain could rationalize it away. That instinct saved my life. Story 5. The hotel room. Business conferences in December always feel depressing. Everyone's mentally checked out, counting down the days until Christmas, and nobody wants to network or pay attention to presentations. But my company required attendance, so I found myself in a mid-tier hotel in Columbus, Ohio, for 3 days of workshops and seminars that could have been emails. The hotel was one of those older buildings downtown, renovated enough to be functional but still carrying the weight of its history in the creaky elevators and narrow hallways. I checked in on a Sunday evening and was given a room on the 8th floor. The clerk mentioned they were running at low capacity because of the holidays, which meant the hotel was mostly empty. I didn't think much of it at the time. Fewer people meant less noise and a better chance of getting actual sleep. I took the elevator up with my suitcase and found my room at the end of a long hallway that turned at a right angle. Room 847, tucked away in the corner with only one neighboring room and a window that looked out over the back alley. The room was standard. 2 double beds, a desk, a bathroom with a shower that had seen better days. Everything was clean but worn. I unpacked my things, set up my laptop, and ordered room service for dinner. The conference didn't start until tomorrow morning, so I had the evening to relax and prepare. I ate my mediocre pasta while watching cable TV, then took a shower and got ready for bed. Around 11:30, I heard a door slam somewhere on my floor. Not unusual in a hotel. People coming and going at all hours. But then I heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy and uneven, like someone was stumbling or dragging their feet. The footsteps moved past my door and continued down the hall, then stopped. A few seconds later, they came back, moving slower this time, and stopped directly outside my room. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing for a long moment, then a soft scraping sound, like someone was sliding something along the door. I got out of bed and moved closer, my ear near the door but not touching it. The scraping stopped. Then the door handle started to turn. Very slowly, very carefully. Someone was trying to open my door from the outside. The deadbolt and security latch were both engaged, so the door didn't budge, but I watched the handle rotate fully before releasing and returning to its normal position. My pulse was hammering in my ears. I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone, ready to call the front desk. But before I could dial, I heard the footsteps move away, back down the hall toward the elevator. I stood there frozen for several minutes, waiting to see if they would return. When they didn't, I convinced myself it was probably a drunk guest who got confused and tried the wrong room. It happens in hotels all the time. I double-checked that both locks were secure and tried to go back to sleep, but I kept waking up at every little sound. The next morning I mentioned it to the front desk when I stopped by to get breakfast vouchers. The clerk apologized and said they would make a note of it, but didn't seem particularly concerned. Again, wrong room, drunk guest happens all the time. I went to my conference sessions feeling tired but relieved that it was just a misunderstanding. That night it happened again. This time I was already in bed with the lights off when I heard the footsteps. The same heavy, uneven rhythm. And once again, they stopped outside my door. I held my breath, waiting. The handle started to turn, just like the night before. Slowly testing. When it didn't open, I heard something new. A soft voice, barely a whisper, coming from right outside my door. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like someone was talking to themselves. Or to me. Then came a knock. 3 soft taps, almost polite. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. Another knock, slightly louder. Then the voice again, clearer this time. A man's voice saying, "I know you're in there." My blood turned to ice. This was not a confused guest. This was someone who knew exactly which room they were at, and they were trying to get me to respond, to open the door, to acknowledge them. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk immediately. I whispered into the phone that someone was outside my room trying to get in, that they were saying things through the door. The clerk said they were sending security up right away. I stayed on the phone with her, and I heard her radio someone. Within maybe 2 minutes, I heard the elevator ding and heavy footsteps coming down the hall. Multiple people. The voice outside my door went silent. When the security guard knocked and identified himself, I looked through the peephole and saw 2 hotel staff members in uniform. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. They searched the entire floor, checked the stairwells, reviewed the security camera footage. The cameras showed a man in a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, face not visible, standing outside my door at the exact times I had reported. But when security arrived, the footage showed him disappearing into the stairwell. They didn't catch him. The hotel moved me to a different room on a different floor, one closer to the elevator and other occupied rooms. They also assigned a security guard to patrol the 8th floor for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep much anyway. The next morning, the hotel manager apologized profusely and offered me a refund, but couldn't tell me who the man was or why he had targeted my room specifically. Here's the part that still gives me nightmares. When housekeeping cleaned my old room the next day, they found something the security team had missed during their sweep the night before. On the door to room 847, at eye level, someone had scratched a mark into the wood. A single vertical line, thin and deliberate, made with something sharp like a knife or a key. The hotel manager showed me a photo of it, and I recognized it immediately. It was a tally mark, like someone was keeping count. The manager said they had no explanation for it and that no similar marks were found on any other doors. But I knew what it meant. I wasn't the first person to stay in that room and have this happen to them. I was just one more mark on the door, and somewhere out there someone was keeping score. Story 6. The Wrong Apartment. After my roommate moved out, I spent 3 weeks living alone in our 2-bedroom apartment while I looked for someone to take over the lease. Money was tight, and I couldn't afford the full rent by myself, so I was desperate to find a replacement quickly. December rent was due in a week, and I had posted ads everywhere trying to find someone, anyone who needed a place. That's how I met Derek. He responded to my ad on a roommate finder website with a brief message saying he was interested and could move in immediately. His profile looked normal enough. He was 32, worked in IT, no pets, non-smoker, clean, quiet. We exchanged a few messages, and he sent me first month's rent and deposit through a secure app without even asking to see the place first. He said he trusted my description and just needed somewhere to stay as soon as possible because he was relocating for work. I thought it was a little odd but was relieved to have the financial pressure off. We arranged for him to move in on December 10th. He showed up right on time with just 2 suitcases and a backpack, which seemed like very few belongings for someone moving into a furnished apartment long-term, but I figured maybe he was having the rest of his stuff shipped. Derek was tall and thin with dark hair and glasses, soft-spoken, polite. He thanked me for the opportunity, asked which room would be his, and immediately took his things to the spare bedroom and closed the door. That was fine with me. I wasn't looking for a best friend, just someone to split bills with. The first few days were uneventful. Derek kept to himself mostly, leaving early in the morning and coming home late at night. We'd pass each other in the kitchen occasionally and exchange pleasantries, but nothing beyond surface-level small talk. He never had visitors, never made noise, never left a mess. In a way, it was like living alone except my rent was cut in half. Perfect situation. But on the 4th night, something changed. I woke up around 3 a.m. with this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I've had that sensation before, usually triggered by a dream or anxiety, but this felt different, more concrete. I opened my eyes and let them adjust to the darkness of my bedroom. My door was cracked open about 6 inches. I always slept with it closed and locked. I sat up slowly and stared at that opening, trying to figure out if I had forgotten to close it fully before bed. Then I saw movement in the crack. Someone was standing in the hallway just outside my room, looking in. I could see the outline of a face, pale in the dim light filtering through from the living room windows. Derek was standing there, motionless, watching me sleep. My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to yell, to demand what he was doing, but fear paralyzed me. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds. Then he stepped back from the door and disappeared down the hallway. I heard his bedroom door close softly. I jumped out of bed and locked my door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. I pushed my desk chair under the handle for extra security and sat on my bed, heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. When morning came, I heard Derek moving around, getting ready for work like nothing had happened. I stayed in my room until I heard the front door close and his footsteps fade down the hallway outside our apartment. Then I came out and checked the apartment. Everything looked normal. His bedroom door was closed, and I didn't have the courage to open it. I called my friend Melissa and told her what happened. She said I needed to confront him and set boundaries, that maybe he was confused or sleepwalking. But I couldn't shake the image of him standing there, perfectly still, watching. That wasn't sleepwalking. That was deliberate. When Derek came home that evening, I was sitting in the living room waiting for him. I asked him directly if he had been outside my room last night. He looked confused, shook his head, and said he slept through the whole night. He suggested maybe I was having a nightmare or saw shadows from the streetlights. His tone was so calm and reasonable that I started to doubt myself. Maybe I had been dreaming. Maybe the stress of money and living with a stranger was making me paranoid. But that night, it happened again. I woke up to my door cracked open and Derek standing in the hallway watching me. This time I was ready. I had positioned my phone on my nightstand within reach, and I grabbed it and turned on the flashlight, shining it directly at him. He didn't flinch, didn't run, just stood there squinting in the bright light. I screamed at him to get away from my door, and he finally moved, walking calmly back to his room like I was the one being unreasonable. The next morning, I told him he had to leave. I didn't care about the deposit or the rent. I wanted him out of my apartment immediately. He refused. He said he had paid for the month, he had rights as a tenant, and I couldn't just kick him out without proper legal notice. He was right. I had signed a sublease agreement with him, and technically he was protected by tenant laws that required at least 30 days notice to vacate. I called a tenant rights hotline and explained the situation. They confirmed that I couldn't force him to leave immediately without going through the formal eviction process, which could take weeks or even months. They advised me to file a police report if I felt unsafe, so that's what I did. 2 officers came to the apartment and listened to my story. They spoke with Derek privately, and he denied everything, said I was unstable and making things up. Without any proof, there wasn't much they could do except make a report for documentation purposes. The officer gave me advice before leaving. Change my bedroom lock to one that couldn't be picked or opened from the outside. Consider getting a security camera, and be prepared to start the formal eviction process if I wanted him gone. I did all of that. I went to the hardware store and bought a new lock with a deadbolt, installed a cheap camera in my room pointing at the door, and filed the paperwork to start eviction proceedings. That night, I barricaded my door with my new lock and the camera running. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of someone trying my door handle. The camera caught everything. Derek stood outside my door for almost 15 minutes, trying the handle, pushing against the door, even using what looked like a credit card to try to jimmy the lock. When he realized it wouldn't work, he stood there staring at the door. Then he spoke. His voice was muffled through the door, but the camera microphone picked it up clearly. He said he just wanted to watch me sleep, that it helped him relax, that I shouldn't make such a big deal out of it. I took that footage to the police the next morning. This time, they took it seriously. Derek was arrested that afternoon at his workplace and charged with trespassing and stalking. During the investigation, they found disturbing things in his bedroom. Photos of me that he had taken without my knowledge, some of them through my bedroom window from outside the building. Notes documenting my schedule, when I came and went, what time I usually went to bed. They also found photos of other women, strangers, taken in similar circumstances. Candid shots through windows, sleeping photos taken from doorways. Derek had a history, not a criminal record, but a pattern of behavior that had gotten him kicked out of 3 previous living situations. He specifically sought out roommate arrangements with single women, moved in, and began this escalating pattern of watching and documenting them. None of the previous women had pressed charges, they just wanted him gone, so he kept finding new victims. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 years for stalking and invasion of privacy, with additional charges from the other women who came forward after his arrest. The judge called him a serial predator who used the roommate system to access vulnerable targets. I had to testify at his trial, and sitting in that courtroom looking at him while he showed no remorse, no emotion, just that same calm, reasonable expression, I realized how close I came to something much worse. He was escalating. The watching was just the beginning. I broke my lease and moved out of that apartment. I couldn't stay there knowing he had spent hours in my space, watching me, documenting me, planning whatever came next in his mind. I live alone now, and I will never have a roommate again. Some risks aren't worth the money you save. Story 7: The Rest Stop. The drive from Denver to Salt Lake City is long and monotonous, especially in December when the landscape is just varying shades of brown and white. I was heading home for the holidays after finishing my last semester of graduate school. Excited to see my family, but exhausted from finals week. I left around 3 p.m., planning to drive straight through and arrive by midnight. The roads were clear and traffic was light. Perfect conditions. I stopped at a rest stop somewhere in western Colorado around 6 p.m. to use the bathroom and grab some coffee from the vending machine. The rest stop was one of those small ones, just a parking lot, a building with bathrooms, and a few vending machines. A couple of semi-trucks were parked in the designated area, and there were maybe 3 or 4 other cars scattered around. I parked near the entrance, grabbed my wallet, and headed inside. The building was old and dimly lit, with that institutional smell of industrial cleaner and stale air. The women's bathroom had 4 stalls, and I could hear someone in the one at the end. I used the middle stall, washed my hands, and went back outside to the vending machines. That's when I noticed the man standing by my car. He was leaning against my driver's side door, smoking a cigarette, looking at his phone. He was maybe in his 40s, wearing a denim jacket and work boots. When he saw me approaching, he straightened up but didn't move away from my car. I slowed down, suddenly very aware that we were the only two people visible in the parking lot. The trucks were too far away for their drivers to see us clearly, and the other cars I had noticed earlier seemed to be empty now. I cleared my throat and said, "Excuse me," trying to sound confident. He looked at me, took a drag from his cigarette, and didn't move, just stared at me with this blank expression that made my skin crawl. I asked him to please move away from my car so I could leave. He flicked his cigarette onto the pavement and said I looked like I could use some company for the rest of my drive. His tone wasn't friendly. It was testing, probing to see how I would react. I told him no thank you and reached for my door handle. He grabbed my wrist, not violently, but firmly enough that I couldn't pull away. He said I shouldn't be driving alone this late, that it wasn't safe, that he could follow me to make sure I got where I was going okay. The pressure on my wrist increased slightly, and I realized he wasn't asking. This was a threat dressed up as concern. Every self-defense class I had ever taken, every warning about situations like this, flooded my brain at once. I looked directly at his face, memorizing details, and said very loudly that he needed to let go of me right now or I would scream. He laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but an amused one, like I had said something cute. He said there was nobody around to hear me scream, that the truckers were asleep and the rest stop attendant had gone home for the night. That's when I noticed the second man. He had appeared from somewhere, maybe from one of the trucks, or maybe he had been hiding near the building. He was younger, late 20s maybe, and he was walking toward us with this casual pace that suggested he and the first man knew each other. They were working together. This was planned. The first man still had my wrist, and the second man was closing the distance fast. I had maybe 10 seconds to make a decision, so I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed as loud as I possibly could, and I brought my knee up hard into the first man's groin. He doubled over, releasing my wrist, and I ran. Not toward my car, because the second man was blocking that path now, but toward the building, toward the entrance with the lights. I heard shouting behind me and footsteps running. I reached the door and yanked it open, bursting back into the building. The woman I had heard in the bathroom earlier was washing her hands at the sink. She looked up, startled, as I stumbled in, breathing hard. I told her there were men outside trying to grab me, that I needed help. She pulled out her phone immediately and called 911 while I locked the bathroom door, and we both stood there listening to the sounds outside. I could hear voices, male voices, arguing about something. Then silence. Then a vehicle starting and driving away fast. The woman stayed on the phone with the 911 operator, giving our location and describing what I had told her. State police arrived about 15 minutes later, 2 officers who took my statement and searched the rest stop area. They found my car untouched, and the men were long gone. One of the officers told me I did the right thing by running and making noise, that rest stops were common hunting grounds for predators because people were alone, tired, and vulnerable. They offered to escort me to the next town where there was a well-lit gas station with security cameras and more people around. I accepted gratefully. The female officer also stayed with me while I checked my car for any tampering. She showed me what to look for, checking under the wheel wells for tracking devices, looking in the back seat and trunk to make sure nobody had hidden there. Everything was clear, but the fact that we had to check it all made me feel sick. I didn't continue driving that night. I got a hotel room in the next town and called my parents to tell them I was stopping halfway. I didn't tell them what happened until I got home 2 days later, and even then I downplayed it because I didn't want them to worry. But it changed how I travel. I never stop at isolated rest stops anymore, only gas stations with stores and lights and other people. I plan my trips to avoid driving after dark. and I carry pepper spray in my center console now within easy reach. The police never caught the men from the rest stop. They said similar incidents had been reported along that stretch of highway over the past year, always following the same pattern. Two men working together, targeting women traveling alone, using rest stops and dark parking areas. But the descriptions varied enough that they couldn't be certain it was the same individuals each time. Maybe it was multiple groups using the same tactic. Either way, nobody was ever arrested. I think about that woman in the bathroom sometimes, the one who called 911 and stayed with me even though she had no reason to. She could have walked away, pretended she didn't hear me, kept herself out of it. But she didn't. She helped a stranger in trouble, and that help might have saved my life. Because I know what would have happened if I had gotten in my car alone or if those men had caught me before I reached the building. People don't grab strangers in parking lots and say threatening things if their intentions are harmless. They were hunting, and I was supposed to be their catch. I got lucky. Not everyone does. Story 8. The Last Train. The Metro North train station in Poughkeepsie gets quiet after 10 p.m., especially on weeknights in December when most people are already home preparing for the holidays. I had stayed late at my office in Manhattan for a work event and was catching the last train back to my apartment upstate. The platform was nearly empty, just me and maybe 5 other people scattered along the length of it, everyone keeping to themselves and staring at their phones or into the middle distance. I stood near the center of the platform where I usually boarded, checking the arrival board every few minutes even though I knew the train was still 10 minutes away. The cold December wind cut through my coat, and I shifted my weight from foot to foot trying to stay warm. That's when I noticed the man standing about 20 feet away, closer than the other passengers, staring directly at me. He was middle-aged with a scraggly beard and a heavy coat that looked dirty even from a distance. What struck me immediately was his intensity. He wasn't just glancing in my direction or looking past me. He was focused entirely on me, unblinking, with this unsettling stillness that made every instinct in my body start screaming. I looked away, hoping he would get the message that I wasn't interested in interaction. But when I glanced back a few seconds later, he had moved closer. Now he was maybe 15 feet away, still staring. I felt my heart rate pick up. I moved down the platform toward a young couple who were standing together, thinking that being near other people might discourage him. He followed, maintaining the same distance, his eyes never leaving me. The couple noticed, and the man put his arm around his girlfriend protectively, both of them looking uncomfortable. We all stood there in this weird standoff until the train finally arrived with a rush of wind and metallic screeching. The doors opened and I jumped into the nearest car, quickly moving toward the back. The car was mostly empty, just a few tired commuters scattered throughout. I sat down and immediately pulled out my phone, pretending to be absorbed in it while secretly watching to see where the man went. He got on the same car. Of course he did. He walked slowly down the aisle, passing empty seats, moving closer to where I sat. When he reached the seat directly across the aisle from me, he sat down and resumed staring. I felt trapped. Getting up and moving to another car would mean passing right by him, and I didn't want to get that close. I considered getting off at the next stop and waiting for a different train, but the next train wasn't for another hour, and the thought of standing alone on an empty platform with this man potentially following me felt even more dangerous. So I stayed in my seat, kept my eyes on my phone, and tried to ignore the weight of his gaze. The train pulled out of the station and began its journey north. After a few minutes, the conductor came through checking tickets. The man across from me didn't have a ticket. The conductor asked him to pay for one or exit at the next stop. The man ignored him completely, just kept staring at me like the conductor wasn't even there. The conductor repeated himself, louder this time, and the man finally looked at him and said something I couldn't quite hear. Whatever it was made the conductor's expression change from annoyed to concerned. He radioed something to someone, then moved on down the car. We stopped at the next station and a transit police officer boarded. He walked directly to the man and had a brief conversation with him, then asked him to come with him off the train. The man refused. He said he paid his fare, which was a lie, and that he had every right to be there. The officer repeated his request, firmer this time, and the man finally stood up. But before he left, he turned and looked directly at me one more time, and he smiled. Not a friendly smile, but something cold and knowing that made my skin crawl. Then he followed the officer off the train. The doors closed and the train continued. I thought it was over. I felt a wave of relief wash over me and I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. But at the next stop, 3 stations later, he got back on. He must have taken a taxi or another train to catch up, because there he was, walking down the aisle of my car again, heading straight for me. This time he sat in the seat directly next to me. I stood up immediately and moved to a different seat across the car. He followed. I moved again, toward the front near the conductor's booth. He followed again. This pattern continued for 2 more moves before I realized he wasn't going to stop. He was going to follow me everywhere I went, testing me, seeing how far he could push before I broke. I went to the conductor's booth and knocked on the window. The conductor slid open the glass and I explained what was happening. He looked past me at the man who was now standing in the middle of the car, still staring, and the conductor's face hardened. He called transit police again and told me to stay right there by the booth where he could see me. The man didn't approach while I was near the conductor, but he didn't leave either. He just stood there, swaying slightly with the movement of the train, watching. At the next stop, 2 transit police officers boarded, and this time they didn't ask the man to leave. They arrested him right there on the train, handcuffed him, and walked him off while he shouted something about harassment and rights. I gave my statement to one of the officers who stayed behind, describing everything that had happened. She told me the man was known to them, that he had been banned from the Metro North system for similar behavior, and that my report would help build the case for keeping him banned permanently. She also told me something that made my blood run cold. 2 women had reported being followed from trains to their homes by a man matching his description in the past 6 months. In both cases, the women noticed him on their train, then saw him again in their neighborhood later that same night. He had followed them home and watched their apartments from the street. One woman had security camera footage of him trying her door handle after she went inside. The police hadn't been able to prove it was the same man because he wore different clothes and kept his face partially hidden, but the build and behavior matched. I rode the rest of the way home in a fog of fear and adrenaline, checking the windows constantly to make sure he hadn't somehow gotten back on. When the train finally reached my stop, I asked the conductor to radio ahead to station security and have someone meet me when I got off. A security guard was waiting on the platform and walked me to my car in the station parking lot. He watched me get in, lock the doors, and drive away before he went back inside. I didn't go straight home. I drove around my neighborhood for 20 minutes, taking random turns, doubling back, making sure nobody was following me. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, I parked under the brightest light and sat there for 5 minutes watching the street before I got out. I ran to my door, got inside, and locked every lock I had. Then I checked every window, every closet, every possible hiding place in my small apartment before I let myself believe I was safe. The man was convicted on multiple charges, including stalking, harassment, and violating the conditions of his transit ban. The prosecutor said my testimony was crucial because it established a clear pattern of behavior that matched the other victims' experiences. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison and a permanent ban from all public transit systems in New York State after his release. But I never took the late train again. I changed my work schedule so I could leave earlier, and on the rare occasions when I had to stay late, I took a taxi or asked a friend to pick me up. The cost was worth the peace of mind, because I know how that night could have ended. If the conductor hadn't taken me seriously, if the transit police hadn't responded, if I had been just a little less aware or a little more polite about not wanting to make a scene, that man would have followed me home. He would have learned where I lived. And then what? I don't know, and I'm grateful I never had to find out. Finally, December nights can hide many dangers in their darkness and cold. These 8 people survived their encounters, but their stories remind us that horror doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it watches quietly from the shadows, waiting for the moment when we're most vulnerable. Stay alert, trust your instincts, and never ignore that feeling when something isn't right. Sometimes that feeling is the only warning you'll get.